Hello and welcome, Adam Buxton, to our Listening Books podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Nice to be here.
And I was just going to start with the first question. Are you reading or listening to any audiobooks or books at the moment?
Oh, yeah, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I listen to them when I'm commuting, when I'm on my bike. I know that's controversial for some people, but I don't listen to them so loud that it endangers myself or other road users. And I don't suggest anyone else does. But I really like them, and I munch through an awful lot of books that way. So let's see, what have I got on my Audible subscription thing here? Maria Bamford. I listened to, well, you get that free with an Audible subscription. So I listened to that one, and that was good. I'm listening to Sarah Cox's memoir, Till the Cows Come Home, because I'm going to be talking to Sarah on my podcast. She's a fellow 90s TV person. So we're going to reminisce about the grimy old
the good
90s.
Old days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm listening to her book before I do that. And I've been listening. I'm going down a deep Beatles rabbit hole recently because of Ian Leslie's book, John and Paul, A Love Story, which is brilliantly read by, his name's gone out of my head now. I'm having a senior moment. He's the guy from, this is what most of my conversations are like. You know, he's the guy, the young one.
Do you remember?
He was in the thick of it. And the young bloke, Chris Addison. I got there.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, he's fantastic. He reads the book so well. John and Paul, A Love Story, recommended.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm sure our listeners and members will really love that. So do you have sort of various audiobooks on the go at the same time, or is it kind of one at a time?
No, I tend to have a few on the go because I'll listen to books. If I'm interviewing someone, I'll listen to like their most recent thing. And sometimes, if it's kind of a well-known writer whose work I don't really know, then I'll probably listen to several of those. And then there's ones like there's music. I listen to a lot of music stuff.
Yeah.
So I listened to another music book about the band The Fall, legendary Manchester post-punk outfit. And that was read by comedian Stuart Lee very brilliantly. And it's a book called The Big Midweek, written by the longest serving member of the band, Steve Hanley, apart from Marquis Smith. He was the lead singer. He was the longest serving member. But Steve Hanley was the bass player, and he has an amazing story to tell about getting into music in the 70s, being a big Bowie fan, Mott the Hoople, Iggy Pop, all those people, and then going through punk. And of course, Manchester was the epicenter of punk in so many ways. I mean, I guess London was too, but so many exciting things happened in Manchester. And that's where The Fall formed. And it's such a good story. And Marquis Smith was a very cantankerous, he's no longer with us, but he was a very difficult, cantankerous and brilliant figure, but not easy to be in a band with. And Steve Hanley writes brilliantly about it. So I love that book too.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to talk about I Love You, Bye. I can't not say it like that whenever I hear it. Yeah. So the audiobook version is, for me, one of the most engaging audiobooks I've heard, because you've got so many different things in there. You got, interview, TV clips, jingles, music, segments from your podcast too. What inspired you to take such a creative, almost audio first sort of direction and approach?
It was definitely audio first. And sometimes I feel a little ashamed admitting that. I still have that impression in my head sometimes that, audiobook isn't really reading a book. And I don't think that that's a particularly useful distinction to make. I feel like they're slightly different things. I think if you ingest a book by listening to it, you've still ingested that book, you're still enjoying it. But yes, it is a slightly different experience. And in my mind, it can definitely be equally rich. And I love the audio medium anyway. Obviously, I've been making podcasts for a long time now.
Yeah.
And I was really excited about the possibility of doing something that was somewhere between a book and a podcast, really. And I wrote it with the audiobook very much in mind. And, the book is a memoir. It's about mainly about working with Jo Cornish, my comedy wife, on television in the late 90s and on through. And also it's about some of the musicians that I've met over the years and worked with, and Travis and Radiohead, and so my love of music runs through it as well. And I talk about my mum as well, my relationship with her, and losing her in 2020 and how that felt, and going through that, coming out the other side. So, but there was a lot of stuff in there, especially the stuff with Jo Cornish, from being on the TV, making the Adam and Joe show, and then being on the radio on BBC Six Music. We did a show there for a long time between 2007 and 2011, I think. And so it just seemed obvious to me that because of the fact that I was talking about radio shows and podcasts and music and jingles, here was an ideal opportunity to include some of those. And I was very happy when HarperCollins said, yeah, great, let's get as many of those in as we can. And also I was very happy because since I did my first book, Ramble Book, in 2020, another memoir more about the early part of my life, I suppose. But in those days, in the bad old days, in 2020, when that audiobook came out, which I think was I liked it very much as well. And it had lots of similar elements like jingles and things like that, but it was only mono. And since then, it has become possible to have a nice stereo audio book. And so I was very pleased about that.
How the times have changed.
Oh yeah. Not everything's getting worse.
No.
Yeah, in audiobooks, it's only getting better.
Yeah, definitely. So just moving on from that, having done radio shows, your podcast, obviously, and now your books and audiobooks, has your unique style of audio craft developed over the years, or has it always been like an organic means of expressing yourself?
Well, I mean, I hope I'm getting better at it. I've definitely done my 10,000 hours by this point. And it's definitely different. Sometimes people say to me that they've gone back and listened to my podcast from the very beginning. And that was 10 years ago now. And so it did sound different. It's longer than 10 years ago, in fact. And yeah, I think you can hear me growing as a person, but also as, an audio creative through that. I'm still not technically expert. I still don't quite know what I'm doing. I'm just sort of guessing a lot of the time. And I watch a lot of YouTube videos when I don't know how to do something technically, but I don't quite understand what it is I'm doing.
So just to go back to about your two books, because they're both obviously very personal books and both very funny and often really vulnerable as well. And I was just wondering if there are any sort of writers that inspired you when writing, or is it just the style that came most naturally to be that kind of funny and vulnerable?
Well, I suppose if I was to be self-deprecating about it, I am a bit of an oversharer, and that's always been what I've always been like that, really, as my friends will be able to tell you. I like it because, I want to connect with people. I enjoy talking to people, and I want them to have that same experience with me if they listen to my podcast. I really like writers like David Sedaris or David Sedaris. Don't know. I still don't really know how to pronounce his name properly. And he's very funny, American, and he is, I don't know if you would call him vulnerable exactly. I mean, there's a lot of him in his books. He writes very entertainingly about his life. And it seems like he's not afraid to talk about some uncomfortable aspects of his life and things that have happened to him. And he always does it in a really funny way. But he's quite restrained, so he doesn't talk directly about his feelings, for example. He'll leave that quite separate. Whereas I will kind of talk about how I feel about things, and I'll talk about when I've been upset by things, and I mean, you can go too far with that, so it's a bit of a balancing act to keep it on the right side of cringe, shall we say?
Right. Is that where your kids come into it? Do you?
Well, I don't know if they've read them actually.
Right.
Maybe my son has. Maybe my son listened to the audiobook, my eldest son. But I don't think about them. I sort of assume that they won't. I sort of assume that my family will avoid what I do. I know my wife does. I mean, or rather, she doesn't make a point of tuning in. I think she understands that it's probably easier for everybody if she doesn't. And she says, you know, every now and again, I'll say to her and to the kids, like, are you okay with me talking about this thing? And can I tell that story? And almost always they say, yeah, do what you want. We're not going to listen anyway.
Nice.
Once or twice, though, my daughter has said, actually, can you not? And we do. The first time she said no, I was like, oh, come on. Who's going to mind? It's a good story. Come on. No one's going to mind if I tell that story. I think you come out of it very well. And she's like, Dad, just don't. And then my wife looks at me and with the don't eyes. And then I know to shut up. And then I won't. But I mean, I really hope that they never regret or are embarrassed by things I've put in there. I don't think they should be. You know, I love them so much and I think they're great. And I would never put anything in there that I thought was embarrassing. You know what I mean? Like, I only put stuff in there that I, you know, think is sweet or funny, or I put embarrassing stuff that I've done. That's fine. I don't mind about me.
Yeah. Oh, and was there anything that you really wanted to include but just didn't make it into the final version at all? I think you mentioned you and Joe reliving the full Radio X argument at one point, maybe?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was in the audiobook. Yes, at the end of both Ramble Book and I Love You Byeee, the audiobook versions, I'm joined by Joe Cornish, who is an important part of both books. And so I thought it would be good to give him the opportunity to answer back and tease me about any things that he thought were particularly rubbish.
Going to the toilet a lot.
yeah, he does that. And we did try, yes, because I asked Joe if he minded me more or less transcribing quite a angry argument we had when we were on the radio at XFM in the early 2000s. And it was one of the first times we were on the radio, actually. And we weren't, well, I found it very nerve-wracking to be on live radio. It's not my natural environment. I like doing a podcast that gives me the opportunity to get everything just the way I want it. You know, I can edit it to my heart's content. I can put the jingles in. I can take out all the bits that made me sound especially stupid in a conversation. And you couldn't do that on live radio. It was all just like there. It felt like it was there forever in a way, because it would go out as a podcast afterwards, although we would edit the podcast. Anyway, the thing is, on the live radio, Joe was much more relaxed and confident than I was. And every now and again, we would get messages in from listeners, and Joe sat in front of the computer and he would sometimes read out the more negative messages that we would get, which he claims that he wasn't bothered by, but it really used to get under my skin and it would throw me so much. And one day I just lost it when he read one out that was particularly pointed. And we had this big row, and we had to play like 4 or 5 songs in a row because we were just busy rowing. And our producer was in the corner going, guys, you're going to have to say something quite soon. And Joe was like, I'm going to leave, actually, because I'm fed up. Anyway, so it was really rough, actually. At the time, it was kind of cataclysmic. It was one of the worst rows we'd had. But when I went home that day, I wrote it all down, because it's one of my ways that I deal with upsetting moments, I think, is just to sort of turn it into a piece of journaling or tell myself that it's an article or something. I don't know what. But anyway, it felt therapeutic to just go home and write it down. Also, I wanted to get some perspective on, like, how much of a jerk had I been in this argument? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes writing it all down, it suddenly becomes clear, like, oh, I overreacted massively there. I was blaming Joe, but I was really going in half cocked there as well. Anyway, so I wrote it all down, and then I found the transcript in the process of writing I Love You Bye. It was tucked away in some files, and I asked Joe if I could include it, and he was totally cool. I mean, he was so nice about everything. He was like, yeah, man, do what you want. And but I thought it would be fun for us to try and recreate it in the podcast that we did at the end of the audiobook. However, that turned out to be beyond our acting abilities. I think it was just because it was such a serious row at the time. It was a bit difficult for us to suddenly occupy that space again in any kind of worthwhile way. So we talked around it instead.
And so with when you sort of recording the audiobook, obviously writing it is one thing, but when you were recording, was it ever a challenge not to sort of laugh at your own jokes, or in those sort of more emotional parts to kind of, just keep going through those when sort of revisiting?
It wasn't a challenge to stop myself cracking up. No. I mean, I think there's a couple of times when you can hear me amusing myself, probably. But no is the short answer. Well, there was definitely some of the stuff with my mum. I definitely got sad. The stuff that's really hard to read sometimes is the stuff about the kids. And sometimes it can be perfectly sweet stuff. It's not like tragic bits. There was a bit in the first book, in Ramble Book, where I talked about my son in his teens being very unreachable and grumpy. And I wrote about a car journey that we'd taken when I picked him up from school one day, and he must have been 15 or 16 and just did not want to talk to me at all. But he did like music, and one day I put on a track called Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs, an amazing instrumental from the 60s. And I said, have you heard this before? And he's like, no, I haven't heard that. Anyway, so I put it on, and I just was kind of sneaking a glimpse at him every now and again from the corner of my eye while I was driving, like, what does he think of this? And then at the end of it, he sort of turned around and he smiled. I feel emotional just remembering it. And he said, yeah, that's really good. And it was amazing. It was like winning the lottery, just that moment to connect with him. Sorry, I'm so pathetic. But as you can see, it triggers me every single time, just that moment. And I wrote about it, and I recorded the first audiobook at home because it was the lockdown, and it took me hours to get. So I've got on my computer files just about an hour of me blubbing and trying to read this paragraph, this kind of soppy paragraph about my son, and just kind of losing it. But yeah, so I had a bit of that with my mum, but because I was doing it in a studio for the second one, and I had a very nice sympathetic engineer who would say, like, oh, this is a sad chapter, and take your time. And but actually it was fine. I think when there's other people around, maybe you keep it together a bit more. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. So what's next for you? Obviously you've an album, and you've been touring, which is amazing. Obviously you've got the podcast ongoing, but are there any more books you'd like to write? Maybe like a Byeee adventure or something?
Yeah, people, I think, I don't know. I don't feel qualified to chip in about Byeee or The Fall or Talking Heads or any of those people that I really love. It would be fun, but I don't know what my angle would be. I don't feel qualified to add anything to the teetering pile of brilliant literature that there is already for all of those people. I really like reading all those books. And if I suddenly discovered something that I could add, then yeah, great. But for the moment, not. As far as, I don't think I'll write about my life for a while. I feel like I've really done that a lot.
Right.
I feel like I've gone on about myself nonstop for the past 10 years or something. I mean, I do that anyway in my podcast. It's a conversation rather than an interview that I have with people. So I talk to them the way you would if you were meeting someone for the first time at a party or at the pub or whatever, and you talk about yourself, and then they talk about themselves, and it's a two-way thing. But as far as writing about it, I think I probably need to take a break from that for a while. But I've just finished a thing for Audible, speaking of Audible, which is a 6-part comedy series. And it's called Successpod. And it came out of a character that I do on my podcast when I'm doing adverts. And he's called Yandru, and he kind of talks like this. And he's sort of like he's like a weird guy that is now everywhere on the internet, who's half a presenter, half a business guru, and sort of with some self-help mixed in and a little bit of philosophy and all that. There's loads of guys like that now on the internet, and they're all doing really well and earning huge amounts of money. And I'm probably bitter on some level that I'm not able to compete with them. But it's a character that I like doing, and I always felt like maybe there would be some more stuff I could do with Yandru outside of the podcast adverts. So he's really the reason that I started doing this series, Successpod. But now he's just a part of it. And it's a lot of sketches about podcasts, taking the mick out of different styles of podcasts. But then it's woven together with conversations with some of my former podcast guests, like Louis Theroux, Ramesh Ranganathan, Guz Khan, Jessica Knappett, Kathy Burke, and Sam Campbell, the Australian comedian. And they're talking to me, and they're giving me advice about my ongoing midlife crisis, which now takes the form of me worrying that I'm being left behind in the podcast world, which has changed so much in the last few years. Now everyone's filming their podcasts and they've turned into something different. And I feel like a grumpy old man that's being left behind, sort of banging the table and saying, no, that's not what podcasting's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about talking. It's an audio medium. We've got television. If you want to watch television, go and watch television. But don't watch some guy doing a podcast. There's no point. It looks rubbish. They all look the same. They're all in these sort of little boring studios with a shelf with some knickknacks in the back and a couple of lamps with
Plants
orange filaments in the bulbs and a couple of sad looking plants, exactly. And a big shiny desk, and and the mics obviously dangling there to signify, oh no, this is still a podcast, even though it's not a podcast anymore. It's a crap television program. Anyway, so you can tell I'm bitter and twisted about it, and I'm preoccupied by suddenly becoming totally irrelevant. At least that's the premise. So it's based on some genuine feelings of impending irrelevance, but they are exaggerated for the purpose of comedy. And so I really enjoy it. And then so there's 3 elements really. There's me talking to my guests about being irrelevant, and then there's kind of spoofs of podcasts, sketches, and then there's me talking to Rosie, who is my dog friend.
I love Rosie.
And so Rosie is kind of like my super ego in Successpod, who's basically one of the voices giving me a hard time about being irrelevant.
Sounds brilliant.
Yeah. Will we get a crossover with Train Guy by Bob Mortimer? Because they kind of sound like they could be a good mix.
Yeah, maybe. Well, sometimes I realize I'll do a sketch or whatever, and I realize like, oh, I've just copied a Bob Mortimer thing because I love him so much. I loved Vic and Bob, and I really like Athletico Mints, and I used to listen to that nonstop in the lockdown. It's one of the things that got me through lockdown, and I'm sure my spongy brain has absorbed so many. Plus, he, like me, he likes doing stupid voices, and I really like doing stupid voices. And so yeah, it's certainly in the same sort of stupid voice universe.
think that's probably all we've got time for, but thank you so much for that a really interesting chat. It was just really fab to hear more about your books and the kind of how everything sort of came together, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to talk to you.
Yeah. And how is Rosie, just out of interest?
Rosie is extremely well. Thank you very much for asking. Probably she's in the kitchen on the sofa, multitasking, doing a selection of toxic farts, lovingly licking her private parts. Happy to go with the lateral flow. She's pro-vaccine, anti-masking. She would like a scratch, some chicken or a chew. Then she will find a random room and do a secret poo. That's my Rosie song. We've been singing it with the band because
Nice.
because while I'm on tour, it's like we started realizing that every now and again I would say to the audience, like, has anyone got any questions? And pretty much every night someone would say, how's Rosie doing?
Sorry.
So we did. No, that's fine. It's a nice question.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I'm glad that people asked that, because now we have a song to go with it, and you just heard it.
She sounds like she's living her best life
She
at the
does.
moment.
She is living her best life, although I did write the lyrics during the lockdown, so they need some updating. That's why there's reference to the vaccine and the lateral flow test, which are somewhat dated now.
Oh, those